What is going on, everybody? It is TripleCrown24 back today with a new sports card psychology podcast. Thank you so much for joining me, as always, every single week that we put out one of these shows. It is greatly appreciated. I love hearing your feedback in the comments over on YouTube. Appreciate all those of you who are listening over on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you may get your podcasts. And if you followed along with the show through 14 episodes, this show unintentionally has been largely baseball focused. That probably is more of an indictment on my own biases. Baseball is my favorite sport. It's the sport that I have always most actively collected. It is the sport that I most actively sell cards in, as well as a full-time dealer. So naturally, a lot of the topics present themselves around baseball, but a few shows ago, I did make, I guess, a promise to myself, but somewhat of a promise to all of you who listen as well, that I was going to try to branch out more to different sports. And today, I'm going to use a baseball analogy here to express this, but today's episode kind of comes out of left field for me because it's something that I'm going to talk about, and really, in essence, I have no idea what I'm talking about, which probably doesn't bode well for the quality of this show. But it's not so much about the subject matter or the intellectual property that is associated with this specific product and phenomena. It is more so about the phenomena itself around it and the patterns that we see and how they can be applied to what we see throughout the hobby, possibly in other parts of our lives. But this is a sports card show, so we're not going to get too existential here. I've been kind of vague so far, so what am I talking about? Well, the title will pretty much give it away, but I'm talking about 2022 Panini WWE Prizm. Yes, that is right. The first foray into a wrestling cards on this show. And I initially recorded this episode a few weeks back. I decided not to release it because I wanted to have some more data come out. And in a sense, I am happy that I didn't end up releasing that one and kind of giving myself a second chance at it, because we're seeing some more data come out with this. And I think it's kind of extending the points that I made when I first tried to record this episode. And now it's a little bit more fleshed out, so I can speak with a larger sample size regarding the data. Today's episode is specifically going to focus around the hype with this product and why hype can be extremely dangerous in the sports card market and the sports card hobby in general. But to understand that, we kind of have to understand why this product was hyped up so much and how it got to the point where it is right now. So to answer that first question, we got to kind of take a little trip back in time to 2012 when the first Prizm release came out. And to give you an idea of the timeline, is that Panini, since they kind of entered the market as a major card manufacturer for the major sports, they acquired the exclusive NFL license in 2016, but they were producing NFL cards. Technically, they were, still going under the brand of, the Donruss and all those in 2009, but Panini starts to really be more so fleshed out in late 2009, early 2010. We've kind of known them as a major player since then, kind of right up there with Topps as 1A and 1B in terms of the highest volume card manufacturers in the game today. And Panini, for the first few years, tried a couple different things to establish its flagship brand, if you will. When we say flagship brand for Topps, what comes to mind is just the base Topps set in baseball, right? Topps has over 70 years of history. They love to tell you about it. We've known that. We see that time and time again. But that is their flagship brand. And if you're looking for a chromium type brand, then Topps Chrome is that brand. If you're more so into prospects, you have Bowman and Bowman Chrome. So Topps has done a phenomenal job with their branding, in my opinion, overall throughout their history. Have there been some hiccups? Yes. I think that's what ultimately led to them being bought out by Fanatics. That's not what this episode is about, though. Panini has had to kind of carve out its own identity and try to find a brand to really attach itself to become synonymous with the Panini name. And they did that with Prizm, albeit it didn't come right away. This was more so a slow burn. So back in 2012, we see the release of Prizm for baseball, basketball, and football. The key with the baseball release is that, as we're all aware, Panini has never had the rights to produce Major League Baseball cards. They've only had the rights to the Major League Baseball Players Association, so that's why they can't use the team logos or the team nicknames. It has to be, for example, Detroit Baseball Club or just Detroit on a baseball card. But with football, basketball, logos are fair game. They have the full licensing for that. And what happened with Prizm when it first came out is that it really came out at a different time in the hobby. You kind of think about what is most popular in the hobby today, and the rookie card has really returned to prominence over the course of the 2010s. But in the earlier part of the previous decade, it was more so a hit-driven hobby. We're talking about more emphasis on your game-used relic cards. And a lot of the love for the relic cards has kind of gone by the wayside. RPAs, or relic cards, or patch cards that are combined with an autograph, still remain incredibly prominent. But without those autographs, they tend to suffer dramatically in terms of their sale prices. Autographs, of course, still prevalent, but I don't see as many autographs when I go to shows, or I don't hear about as many autographs being talked about. And that could be for numerous reasons. For one, a lot of the autographs that we're used to compared to players of previous rookie classes that have come out have gone up in price. And then some of the signing fees for some of these guys has increased as well. Apologies here. I got a rock stuck in my shoe if you're watching on YouTube. And when you see that, what happens with it is that people have to kind of look for the next best thing when they become priced out of something. So in comes the rookie card. And with a lot of people returning to the hobby over the last 5 years, or entering the hobby for the first time, a lot of what they're drawn to is the rookie card, because either they grew up going after it as a child, collecting as a youngster, or it's just what they've been told. You want rookie cards, or you want first Bowman cards, and we're talking about baseball as kind of a little bit of an accessory to that. And what this is kind of driven is that more people have gone chasing the rookie cards. Well, the beauty about Prizm is that when it first started out, it was more so about it was a box that you got a lot of cards in. You got your base rookie cards. You got a lot of color, so you get the color parallels, or the prisms as they were called back then. The silver prism wasn't even a term; it was just a prism. So it would be 2012 Panini football, Prizm football, Tom Brady, Prizm. And I think having the silver definitely added to that. Although the base cards still have a silver background, they're just not shiny. It's a whole thing. But I think that definitely did help them with their branding, is calling them silvers. That's kind of something that the hobby kind of gave the name over time. And you only got 2 autographs per box. Typically, these autographs were sticker autographs as well. We know that the hobby generally has a disdain for your sticker autographs. And outside of that, there wasn't too much to be said about Prizm. It was one of those that I remember for the longest time, 2013 Prizm, one of the worst draft classes in NFL history. You could buy those hobby boxes for about $40 on like David Adams and those kind of sites during their Black Friday sales. Just they could not get people to buy these things. I don't know what those boxes cost now, but they are much more pricey. And during the peak, they were, I think, probably several $100s a box. They probably got up to 500 at least. Again, I don't know what they are now. Perhaps they're even more. But that's kind of your backstory with Prizm. So as time goes on, we see that Prizm kind of becomes more and more prevalent because people are starting to focus more so on rookie cards. And really around 2016, 2017 is when this shift starts to change. We see certain guys who are signed exclusively to certain companies so that they cannot sign autographs. Ben Simmons is one that comes to mind. Ben Simmons, the top pick in 2016. When 2016 NBA products were released and he was the guy to chase after, he was signed to Upper Deck. So the NBA is allowed to, because he's still in the NBA, Panini is allowed to produce his cards, but he has an exclusive autograph license with Upper Deck, so he can only sign cards for Upper Deck. That's why there is no Ben Simmons National Treasures RPA or Prizm Rookie Auto. And as you go along in time, you'll get football around that time. You have contenders prices through the roof for your guys like Carson Wentz, Jared Goff, and then in particular the two big Dallas rookies from that year, Dak Prescott and Ezekiel Elliott. And if you look at the baseball side of things, the following year you have a guy like Aaron Judge who comes out. His autographs are astronomical prices. Now, 5 years later, some of those names have really held up over the test of time. Some of those guys, not as much. They still have some place in the hobby. You have to keep in mind the context of the time. So what happens is that because of this and the autographs going up in price, subsequently the hobby box prices go up as well. But people still want to be able to open up cards and still be able to pull cards of these guys. So they go after the next best thing, which is the base rookie card. And the beauty of the base rookie card is that you can pull it from any format, right? You can go to a big box store and buy a blaster box, and you can pull out an Aaron Judge rookie from a pack, or if you're opening up some optic basketball, you could pull a Ben Simmons rookie. And the barrier for entry, or the cost for entry, is much cheaper, significantly cheaper, a fraction of the cost of a hobby box. And the beautiful thing is that you get the card you want. Now, you could argue that you could also just go buy the single, but people want to open wax, and we have to have wax open in order to get those singles out there. And what this really allows is that Prizm becomes more prominent because it has that longevity at this point. You know, Panini, a lot of the brands from 2012 and onward, some have come and gone, but Prizm has been a perennial fixture. For the most part, there's a couple of years there in baseball where it was subject to just a Chronicles kind of insert, but now Prizm Baseball is once again a standalone product. And what this creates is more and more attention around this product. We also see Optic kind of rise as your number two. But Prizm, it combines the best of both worlds. It's not really a chromium equivalent to a quote-unquote paper product like we see with the relationship between Topps flagship being Series 1, 2, and Update compared to Topps Chrome. It's really just its own standalone brand where it's a chromium-based brand, which means it's a slicker card that has typically the parallels are going to be shiny to some degree, depending on what color they are. Depends on how much they pop. And through that, Panini really carves out its identity in basketball and in football. To some degree, baseball. Some of the earlier baseball Prizm releases have gained more and more momentum, but really we're focusing on the ones that are fully licensed, so basketball and football. And as Prizm goes on, it continues to build up over time. And then we get kind of spoiled by these absolutely stellar rookie classes of multiple sports, right? In 2017, you have kind of your big three quarterbacks, one of which has emerged as kind of the face of the league to some would argue, in a guy like Patrick Mahomes. And then the following year, you have guys like Baker Mayfield, Josh Allen, and Lamar Jackson, all of which have kind of had their day in the sun as kind of the guy, so to speak, among the quarterbacks to come out. NBA-wise, in 2018, you get two studs, Trae Young being one of them. Trae Young's hobby hasn't been as strong over the past year, I would say. But one of the guys who was really, I don't think his cards have really ever been cheap, would be Luka Doncic in basketball. Of course, the year after that, you have Zion Mania, and that's kind of been overshadowed now by Ja Morant, who has absolutely gone through the ceiling in terms of his prices. Football, you have some very hyped prospects like Kyler Murray, and then 2020, you have Justin Herbert and Joe Burrow. It is this next big thing that seems to be coming out every single year. And really, as sports fans, we've been spoiled to a lot of great young talent to enter over the past few years, that when something happens like the 2021 baseball rookie class or the 2021 NFL quarterback class, where they don't necessarily overwhelm people right away and blow people out of the water with expectations, that now we kind of say, hey, this class sucks. Well, this is actually more realistic of what we can really see. The past few years have been a bit of an anomaly. And for those who are entering the hobby or returning to the hobby within the past few years, that can kind of create some confusion or create a certain expectation due to the hype that is around these products. And that brings us to the WWE Prizm. So for years now, Topps has held the licensing agreement for WWE. And in the past few years, we've seen Panini kind of position themselves around combat sports. Perhaps this was anticipation of the Fanatics deal that would secure the license for NBA and NFL. But Panini did secure the license a few years back for UFC. And we've seen a lot more attention on UFC cards, more than we've ever seen before, especially with the release in 2020 of the first ever UFC Prizm release, and kind of stepping outside of those big three sports that Panini is focused around. Now, have they ventured outside of this before? Yes, there was a couple of hockey releases. 2012 Prizm Hockey was part of a subset that was similar to Chronicles, and then the only standalone NHL release was in 2013. After that, the licensing gets shifted back to Upper Deck exclusively, so we no longer see hockey releases on that front. And then they've experimented with, your draft picks products as well with Prizm. So you see the guys in their college uniforms, since Panini acquired college licensing in 2015 from Upper Deck, who had previously held that for several years. So in a very aggressive move, they went out and got the WWE license from Topps, which was one that I think caught some people by surprise. And it seemed that, if I remember correctly when this happened, it wasn't all that long ago, but kind of the timeline of events is that as soon as this happens, the very first thing that gets announced is WWE Prizm. And immediately, the timing on this couldn't have been better, because we've seen, of course, a boom in a lot of areas, but wrestling is one of those sports that I would say has kind of their segment of the hobby has grown exponentially. And part of that is just knowing some friends who that's what they are really into, and kind of learning from them and just kind of hearing what they're saying about things, or following people where that's more so their niche. Have I had much experience with it? No, not really. I don't sell too many wrestling cards in my store. I don't collect them. So I can't really say for sure from my own experiences, but just firsthand accounts from people that I trust and know are more familiar with it. That's pretty much been the consensus to this point. So with this buildup and the interest in it, the fact that now you tie the Prizm name to it creates tremendous hype around this WWE Prizm release. And there's a couple of reasons for that. It's kind of a perfect storm of just the hobby hype machine and what it has been over the past few years, and combining that with a name brand that people trust. I'm sure you see commercials where people will give testimonials that, like, oh, my dad or my mom was a customer here and their parents were a customer here, and now I'm a customer here. It goes generations, or I've been a valued customer for X number of years. And you hear all these testimonials. Well, that's kind of what you've gotten with Prizm, is that it's relatively kept the same format over the years. Now they have added the stuff like the T-Mall, or the first off the line, or the quick pitch, fast break, no huddle, whatever sport you're referencing there. So they've extended the brand and kind of reconceptualized or added parallels to it. But overall, the general premise of it has stayed the same over its history. The designs are relatively the same, and the concepts and the what they try to do with the product doesn't change too much. It's recognizable from its inaugural release over 10 years ago now to this point. Actually, 10 years ago exactly, to this point in time. And what we're seeing with this is that with the hobby hype train around Prizm, is that people love Prizm, right? There was kind of during the peak of prices this time last year, I would say, or even a few months prior to this time last year, there was so much talk about Prizm and Prizm base rookies and Prizm color, that was kind of one of the most talked about, if not the most talked about areas of the hobby, and what a lot of the people entering the hobby were chasing after. Now, a lot of the quote unquote hate for base has ramped up as time has gone on. And I guess people have realized how fleshed out those populations are on the graded version of those cards, or in general, what just the supply is of the cards in general, whether they be raw or graded for that matter. And it's kind of soured some people. What I have noticed is that there hasn't been too much of a change in the 2012 Prizm sphere, which was the inaugural release for all those sports. And a lot of those golds and silvers are still commanding a pretty penny. The base have taken a bit of a hit, but they're not cheap by any means, especially for the top guys. There's still significant interest in the first year of Prizm, and we tend to say that history repeats itself, and that has kind of opened the door for WWE Prizm to kind of become, quote unquote, the next big thing. And with the history of Prizm, people trust it. People don't feel like they're going to get burned by this. And that is why so many people have taken an interest in it. And my timeline on Twitter, my Instagram feed, my Facebook interactions, all for the business, I have seen so much more talk about wrestling cards than I have ever seen before. In all the years I have done this, whether it be a collector or a dealer, I have never seen this many people talking about wrestling cards. Now, could it be that there's just a bunch of closet wrestling fans out there who typically don't talk about it on social media? Maybe that is the case. But as time has gone on, I've seen less and less talked about it. And I'm kind of wondering, why is that? Is it just that, the hype has kind of died down? Have people lost interest in this product? Was the interest something that was even sustainable to begin with? Was this something that people had a genuine interest in, or was it just getting caught up in the moment, getting caught up in the hype, and really just an inorganic influx of people into the wrestling sector of the sports card hobby? Well, we're going to attempt to answer that today. Now, the data that I have is not perfect. I'll explain more about that in a minute. And as you just heard there, I'm kind of using my own observations in terms of how much people are talking about it. I have no data to back that up. That is just my own anecdote. And you might say, well, Triple Crown, that makes your argument very weak and invalid. Well, you could fix that if you want to, but I encourage you, if you're on any of these platforms, go look at it for yourself, right? Go take a look and see, am I seeing as much of this being talked about? Have you noticed it at all? And make your own determination from there, I guess, would be my advice on that. But I don't have search engine data to show how many impressions a certain topic got. There would be too many variables really to show that for sure and to kind of make any kind of conclusions from that. But what we do have is sales data. And my caution with this is that a few shows ago, I did my eBay comps, Beware of eBay Comps episode. And funny enough, here I am using eBay completed sales as a point to make here. I think that this is valid for a couple of reasons, right? That I cannot prove definitively that any of these auctions were actually paid for, right? I cannot show that these are actually completed sales. I'm just using the data that we have available here, and I want you to more so focus on the trends rather than the actual number themselves. The numbers themselves do have a bit of credibility and a bit of weight in this argument I'm about to make, but not as much as we think. So upon release, these boxes were around $800. They peaked up to around $1,250, even $1,300. Now we kind of see this. Now, these are loose boxes on eBay. Typically, this is the cheapest you're going to see a lot of these boxes if you go into a hobby shop. If you try to buy these from a more reputable dealer, then they're going to be a bit more. Part of that is because, well, you don't really know where these boxes come from. They could maybe even be resealed. They could be from a case where the case hit has been popped out already. So we don't really, we're expecting this to be a dud box. It's definitely a roll of the dice when you're buying loose boxes on eBay. You see a few sales here above $700 and even some that creep up around the neighborhood of $800 or even a little bit over that. But over the past week or so, a lot of boxes clocking in around $600 to $650. I think on the low side, I have seen some boxes right around $600 is the cheapest I'm seeing some of them, which is about a 25% dip upon release. That is to be expected. However, it's down about 50% from the peak price. And really, the peak price was not all that long ago. This product has been out for less than 2 months. which is, in all things considered, a very short amount of time for a product to drop 50% in box prices. So why is this? Is it that the interest has died down? Is it that the singles have died down? And is this too much for these boxes? Well, keep in mind that back in the day, Prizm was as I mentioned, 2013 Prizm football, which is not a very good product if you're looking at rookie cards. 2013 NFL draft class is notoriously bad, especially if you look at those since the turn of the century. And in terms of the hobby, it's very void of any hobby stars. Let's put it that way. You have DeAndre Hopkins is probably the best player that's come out of that class, I would argue, and his hobby is not great, especially compared to some of the other really good wide receivers that have come out of the draft classes of the past 20 years or so. So when you keep that in mind, those boxes being $40 a piece, let's look at maybe a good year, like 2014. I remember back then, you have a guy like Odell Beckham Jr., and you have a bunch of quarterbacks that were very highly regarded at the time. You'll laugh now when I mention Teddy Bridgewater or Johnny Manziel or Blake Bortles. But hey, at the time, those were legitimate names that you could pull from those products. They were very much so hyped, and people were going after their cards. But even then, Prizm jumbo boxes, which I think you got like 4 or 5 autographs and a bunch of color, kind of similar format to what we see the Prizm hobby boxes looking like now, except for there's not as many autographs. Those were around $150 a box. And yeah, I get it. A lot has gone up since 2014. But even back a few years back, you see hobby boxes that are only a few $100s. Whereas something like this, WWE prices, typically if you look at wax, such as Topps Chrome, most of the time they're going to clock in around $50 to $60 several years after their release, unless there is something that is really important to chase. So you have whatever the wrestling equivalent would be of a Mahomes type of guy or a Trout type of guy, right? So the fact that these are still $600 a box, when I would say that in normal times that this would be a fun rip at $100, is very telling that these are still incredibly overpriced, in my opinion. Now, the reason that you could justify paying these prices is if the singles market was supporting these. Like, you could realistically pull a card out of this that would justify it. And I don't want to make this delusion of grandeur, because I feel like social media does a great job of this already, that making your money back opening wax is easy, because it is not. Take it from someone that has opened a lot of wax for his business, that I open wax by the case almost all the time, because it is strategically the best move for me, and it plays on the averages well enough. But if you're just opening up one box, and even if you are opening up a case and you're only selling certain cards, for me, I had to sell every single card that was in those cases to justify it and put those out there and grade those cards. It's a lot of work. Is it fun? Yeah, but it is a lot, and I mean a lot of work to piece out everything from those cases. And if you're doing it from a box, it's definitely less work and higher risk but higher reward, right? If you hit one of those big cards out of your one box, then the reward is going to be substantial. Even so, if you just get a bunch of solid quality cards where the odds of pulling them are much higher, then you can make your money back. So let's take a look here. And I want to we're going to start with the rookies, right? So there's 2 big rookies from what I've deduced. And I could be wrong on this. Any of my wrestling fans out there can really back me up or deny my argument here. But this is Braun Breaker. To my knowledge, this is one of the better names that is in the product in terms of rookies. Here you see on right around release, $120 for a hyper. Again, I cannot say definitively that this is what what it actually sold for. Did someone actually pay for this and kept the card? They didn't try to return it or anything. We don't know. Here you see some of the base rookie cards here, and a very strange dip here, 2 days apart. Auctions, $31 on this one, and then $6.50. But we see a couple here for $15 and $20 sold. Again, Remember my beware of comps video. We don't know if these are for sure even paid for. Here we see $32 on the hyper. So in the span of 9 days, it goes from $120 down to $32. And if we keep going up here, you'll see there's a lot of color that is mixed in here. So it's not the best organized, but only a couple dollars here on April 25th for the base rookie card. See a lot of 4 here at under $15, less than a blaster. And overall, the prices have come down drastically on this. Now, there's not a lot of data here on some of the lower numbered stuff. For example, here we have the orange Prizm out of 99, sold for $225, or at least that is what it's sold at. Was it paid for? Again, we don't know. Here's a very telling one to me here, a silver. Of course, the silver is very much sought after, $10 a piece, right? A hyper, remember that first example here, we're down to $16. So this is about 1/8 of the price initially. So nearly a 90% dip from release day. Now, there is a such thing as day one pricing, as we call it in the hobby, that we see with a lot of this stuff, and it's very tied into hype. We're willing to pay more when something comes out to be the first to own it. In a culture that is so much tied into instant gratification with consumers and the effect that pre-orders have on a lot of aspects of life and consumer products, it is not surprising to see something like this where something will dip. Is it surprising, though, to see it dip 90%? Absolutely. Let's go to another rookie. This is Gable Stevenson, who I believe is actually an Olympian. I think that is kind of the big talking point with this guy. 413 results. So a lot more data to go off of than Braun Breaker here. And very interesting one here. Very first one that was put up, $199. Was this one paid for? Given what these next two sold at, I would highly doubt that this one was paid for. Again, we don't know for sure, but it doesn't bode too well. Here's a half case break. I just think that this is extremely interesting. $325 at auction for a half case to get all this guy's cards. We see here some very, very interesting data. Here's a cracked ice at $350, but the base card here, there's quite a few sales checking in around $40, but some that really just span so much. Here's a blue, or excuse me, a purple. It looks blue in the picture. To 149 at 225. So one of the best guys you can get, I would presume, or certainly I guess the top rookie that you could get, as this guy here says, Chase rookie at 149, 225. So still less than a quarter of the price of a hobby box. Just something to keep in mind here. Here, as we go along, we start to see the decline. Here's the first time we've seen an autograph. It is a numbered autograph to 49. And for the price of 2 hobby boxes, really, since I see a lot of them going for around $1,000, you can get one. Get an autograph. 2 hobby boxes, you can get this very sought-after card, probably the best card in the case that you would pull. Interesting. We'll keep going. Here's the second autograph we see. It's a base autograph. It sells at $600. Again, we don't even know that this is paid for, but the data is there for $600. Less than a hobby box, even less than a hobby box right now. So we keep going on and going on and going on. We start to see more and more of a decline. Here's a gold. This one I highly doubt was paid for at $14,000. I don't know if there was any data to say for sure or any evidence that this was paid for. We see the base rookie, though, starting to clock in around $15. The hypers and the prisms, they're starting to creep back down towards $100. Here's a silver that finally breaks below that at $75. I'm just showing you all this data as we go to some of the more recent ones. Kind of show you what it looks like now. 99 cents for the base rookie card. Here we see $24. That's a lot. Here's a green at $6. So we see maybe $5 on the high end for some of these base rookies. Shows you quite the decline, isn't it? Here's a silver here for 16. Remember what those silvers were going for a little bit ago. Even after the initial day one pricing drops down, this is still an 80% dip to 90% dip on these prices. So, all right. So the base rookies, maybe they're not necessarily carrying the product. I get that. 2012's rookie class for NBA and NFL has some solid players. There's not anybody who I would say is in that generational talent category, but there's some solid players. But a lot of the focus is on the silvers and the golds of the veteran guys. So why don't we take a look at the veterans now? So I would say the most recognizable name in professional wrestling is Hulk Hogan, right? This is a household name. Let's go back to the start of time here and show this is some of the Hulk Hogan prices. We're seeing over $10 for just the base card on Hulk Hogan right around release. Here's a silver at $315. I'll keep being a broken record here and reiterating this point. We don't know how many of these were paid for and then how many of these were subsequently returned or some shenanigans happened with them. But this is what people were allegedly paying for them. I'll say allegedly with huge emphasis on that around the time. And immediately, again, you see the dip from day one pricing. This is more so what I would expect. And typically, this is where the prices are going to settle, a few days in. And once people get their group break cards in, and there's been a few data points here. But really, these are dipping a lot. And I'm not really talking about specific examples here because there's a lot of different parallels here that are being shown. But I'm sure as you're going along, you just pick a parallel and maybe rewind this video a couple of times to see. Here's a autograph. So imagine you open up a hobby box and you pull this Hulk Hogan autograph. You must be thrilled with this. And at the peak price, after fees and everything, if you sold this on eBay, I get this one was sold on My Slabs, you're barely making your money back on the hobby box at peak price. Now this is about the equivalent of 2.5 hobby boxes on eBay after fees, probably around 2 hobby boxes, right? So here you see more and more of this data, these parallels really starting to dip. And this is still only a few days after release. Why don't we go to now, right? Let's take a look and see what some of these are selling for. So you see the green here, $10. A silver down to $20. When I first recorded this video, they were around 25, 30. Now it seems that they're more so 20 to 25. Here's a silver that went for under $10. You see the base card is more so what we expect the Prizm base card of a top guy to be, a couple bucks at the most. So more realistic. There doesn't seem to be as much interest in this. We're seeing now several of these silvers going for under $20. And again, in a hobby box, a hobby pack, which was around $100 a pack at peak, even more so in some cases, if there's like an autograph or something low numbered alive, maybe even more, you're seeing it drop. So even these top guys, the color on them is still probably not even worth justifying the cost of the box. So, okay, we've looked at that. How about the hits, right? Let me look at one of the top guys here, an autograph of Stone Cold Steve Austin, right? I watched a lot of breaks of this over on Whatnot to kind of get an idea, is this actually like worth it? Or, would opening a box of this actually be worth it? And I saw so many people buying packs for $80 to $100, or if the hits weren't live at the low end, the packs are going for $65. Maybe if you got lucky, you got one for $60, just chasing the color. But let's pretend that the autographs are alive. So $80 to $100 a pack, and you pull Stone Cold. Well, if you bought just that one pack out of that one random box and you pulled this, yeah, you were probably pretty happy, especially if you got one of these dual autographs here. And overall, these dual autographs, they're really standing up well. Some of these are 2 to 3 hobby boxes worth, which is what you kind of want to see out of your case hit. That's more so indicative of normal times, I would say. But overall, some of these are barely even getting hobby box prices. Imagine this. You pull out a base Stone Cold autograph, and it sells for $400 before even fees. I get My Slabs, it's going to be a little bit cheaper on fees, but still, you're barely making over half your hobby box back. And this is most likely the best card in that box. Maybe you get lucky and get some really nice color of someone, and it helps you recoup, and then your base kind of gets you back there. But it really shouldn't be that way when you're pulling one of the best hits in the case to barely get back to even, and not even that. Like, for example, this one here on eBay, you're not even getting back to even on this one here. Here's a red. So even the numbered one here at auction, 624. I mean, some of the boxes were going for less than that on eBay, but you still have to pay sales tax most likely. Here's one for 590, 615. And again, we don't even know what these were paid for. That's the scary part. A lot of these were at auction. Were these even paid for? And if they weren't, and people were just show bidding these, that's even more scary, because that means that the realistic price of what they should have sold for would be even less. So now even your hits, your guaranteed 2 autographs per box, are not even worth it. So we have to go even beyond that. Let's go to the case hits, right? There's one at the top I really want to talk about, because I'm going to go down here to talk about this card because it was very, very controversial at first. The first John Cena Color Blast to be sold. So the Color Blasts are your case hits. They have been regarded as one of the toughest case hits to hit among all the ones that Panini makes, among the downtowns and all the various ones, right? There's different ones for different sports. And in Mosaic, it's like the Masquerade Ballers are kind of a low end one. Elite has like the Dimensions. The Kabooms are very prevalent one. There's tons of them out there. A lot of different ones out there. Color Blasts, though, were kind of regarded as one of those that every multiple cases, or even in some areas up to every 10 cases, you would get a Color Blast. Where in WWE Prizm, I don't know exactly right now what they are, but I believe they're 1 per case. Are you guaranteed to get one? No, I don't think Panini makes any guarantees, but I think they're 1 per case on average. So more often than not, you're going to pull one out. So this is a gentleman on Twitter who most of you are probably very familiar with if you're over on Twitter. He has a very large presence over there. He actually pulled this card. He put it up for auction. Within 24 hours, it was up near 5 figures at auction, and it ends right around there. He actually posted a message of the winning bidder who said that he, in good faith, could not buy this card since this one on the same day had sold for more, right? Or it sold for a few $1,000s less, that it just wasn't worth it. So you see that one there. Some of the end times here might be confusing. I know that this one sold after these other two, but here you see the one outright at 7,500, and then you see the one best offered accepted down to 3,800. And I'm fairly confident, if I remember correctly, that it also came out that this one was not paid for. This one, I think that this one was paid for, but again, I'm not even 100% sure that even this one was paid for. And we go up the line here to see if we can find another one. Now, these aren't common, but the problem with the non-numbered case hits, as much as I love them, don't get me wrong, I love these case hits for all the different sports out there, is that in general, Panini can change the print runs on them at any time. That's the tricky thing with the non-numbered stuff, is that, yes, they're 1 per case, but if there are more cases being produced subsequently, that means more of these are being produced as well. So then they are not as rare. Here's a graded version of PSA 9 at just over 2,000. So here you have one now that is slabbed. You know the condition of it guaranteed here. We see some of these Color Blasts start to trickle in under 1,000. So some of them under the case prices, or excuse me, the box prices at the peak. And even in some cases, if you buy them from a reputable dealer now, the boxes are still around $700. So after fees, you're probably still coming out behind on a case hit. A case hit. Here you see the most recent one on May 9th, just a few days ago at the time of recording this. The John Cena Color Blast at $1,500. And again, I don't know if this one was even paid for, but $1,500. And from what I have gathered, that the Cena one is probably one of the more sought after ones on the checklist. Some of the data here on the sales may suggest otherwise, but I know it is one that people were very excited about. This is a big one too, to my knowledge. This is one of the more popular ones, the Roman Reigns one. PSA 10, and we know how much people love their 10s, checking in at $3,100 on an accepted offer. Now, I really hate when people, I really hate when people say, yeah, this was the price, this one sale, so this is what the price is on the card. I really don't like that idea of thinking just because one sold for it at that one time. That means that after the first sale, the price would never change, right? That's just, I think, very flawed thinking. It's a big pet peeve of mine. But again, this one assuming it was paid for, sold at $3,100. So this is several hobby boxes now. But again, to get Roman Reigns, I think the checklist on these is what? 10? There's 10 different ones. I don't see any of these card numbers here that go above number 10. So you have a 1 in 10 shots at, in theory, 1 in every 10 cases on average, maybe even a little more. We'll say 1 in every 12 to 15 if we're being very conservative, to pull who you want. And the cost is maybe a couple of hobby boxes. So overall, I see some of these cards still 1 month later, or even 6 weeks later in some cases, I guess you can argue, depending on when you're listening to this. Some of them would justify the box prices being what they are. But the odds of pulling these, I can tell you, is so incredibly slim. I watched dozens of these boxes open. I only saw one Color Blast ever pulled. That's not to say that they are, in fact, that rare. It just so happens that I only came into one. It was a Becky Lynch. I think it was the one that was pulled. I don't remember exactly. It was one of the women, but I'm pretty sure it was Becky Lynch. I've never seen a gold pulled. And I've actually had a few cards come in on consignment. I have a gold of a guy. I don't know how popular he is in the hobby in terms of wrestling cards, but someone had told me what the quote unquote comps on it were. There again, it was just one sale of the card one time. But I know that my asking price is even less that of a hobby box. And I would say that the golds probably fall less than 1 per case from what I'm seeing. And that means, number one, that they printed a lot of this. They printed a lot of it, especially when you consider the retail. There are a lot of the base cards and a lot of the silvers out there. But the non-numbered stuff is probably not as rare as we think. I think that's kind of a given. We've seen that time and time again with a lot of these products. But even the golds, if we look at them, I don't have the data pulled up here, but I'm going to pull up WWE Prizm Gold. So these are known quantities. Now we know exactly how many of these are out there. They're out of 10, as they always have been. And we see some of the ones here. We see some gold autographs, and they have the gold insert cards as well. So that might kind of skew some of these. But some of these gold autographs are clocking in at less than the cost of a pack, even some of these base golds. This is a first off the line one, so we won't look at that too much. This one here is less than a blaster. I get this guy right here. I've never heard of this guy. Maybe he's not all that good. Again, $20 for this one here. Here we see a gold autograph, champion autograph, just over $100. So even these known quantities where we know exactly how many of they are, still just not that many of them hitting the market, which suggests that there's still a lot of them sealed away in packs because there just is that much wax out there. And they're really not commanding the price that you would expect to get for a $600 box, especially if you consider these shimmers. These boxes are, I think, still $1,500 plus. See a guy like this one says Batista. He's in Guardians of the Galaxy, plays Drax. So he's an actor. He's a guy who actually has mainstream appeal too. 366. So maybe 20% of your first off the line hobby box. I get that you're going to get some other good stuff in there too, but that is alarming to me. That is extremely alarming. So what can we take away from this? You know, are the singles justifying the costs of these boxes? And to me, the answer is absolutely not. And I think that's generally the case right now in wax overall, that a lot of what we saw initially with this was very much hype driven. And the price drop of up to 90% in some cases is indicative of a market crash, right? If the stock market dipped 90%, that is a crash. If whatever you may sell in your job or the company you work for may sell a goods or a service, if that service or good dropped in value by 90%, you would consider that a market crash and a disaster. That is what we're seeing here. And it's a bit more difficult to disguise because these prices are still pretty high compared to what we're seeing. You know, if box prices were $100 each, then these prices would not be where they're at. But in the old days, I know I'm being a bit of a hobby boomer here, or a get off my lawn type, but in the old days, you know, these cards, you know, maybe they would command this, but it wouldn't be necessarily what we're seeing right here. Um, and also in the old days too, if you pulled one of the top guys and you got something like an autograph of theirs, it covered the cost of the box and then some, maybe even 2 to 3 boxes. Like for example, if you pulled, I know that in some cases, some Panini football products, if you pulled an Andrew Luck autograph back in 2012, now some of the boxes were inflated, but even then, so that it would definitely cover at least the cost of the box. Where here you're not even seeing that, and I think as you go down the line in terms of the value of the cards, they're fractional compared to what the cost of the box price is. So, kind of what do I take away from this is that overall, of wax right now, we're seeing a very scary trend. Is that I would say the hits that justify opening the boxes, you kind of have to be in that 95th percentile of the hits in terms of their value and their rarity to justify opening one of these boxes. And that's more so, I would say, around like a 60 to 75% back before kind of the hobby boom. And that might not sound like that much on paper, but that means that more and more of these boxes are becoming not worth it. And what it also means is that the boxes that would be considered duds back in the day are even bigger duds, right? If these boxes are still being manufactured where I'm saying that they should be $100 in value, right? Let's even just double that and make it super conservative and say this is a $200 box. And they're still being manufactured with $100 in value in them. And the singles market is not responding to that, right? The singles, they've gone up maybe a little bit from what we're used to, but they haven't really gone up as much as what we would expect based on the box prices, right? So now you're seeing people who would get slaughtered before on boxes get even more slaughtered now because of the hype and anticipation. And you see on social media people pulling out these color blasts. You see people pulling the golds or sharing their big hits. And that's kind of the dangers of social media. We'll talk about this in a future episode, but it's very much so a highlight reel, and it doesn't provide a very realistic expectation about what you actually get from these boxes. And that is very concerning to me because what that does is it ultimately feeds more into the hype. Believe me, Panini loves this. The big three wax distributors, they love this. They want you to share their hits because it's basically free advertising. It helps the product sell itself. Not that something like this with this much hype around it needs all that, but it sets a very dangerous precedent because if people go into this, and especially if they're not as financially inclined, especially during times right now where we are on the verge of a global financial crisis. I giggle when I say that, but that's more so a coping mechanism. I'm certainly feeling it myself. The middle class is feeling it in the United States for sure. That's a political discussion. I don't want to get into that right now, but people have to make choices. Even if they decide to splurge on these boxes, I would imagine most of the people who are buying these really aren't in that much of a pickle. But if people are buying these with this expectation that they're going to get this and then they get absolutely slaughtered, what that does is it diminishes trust in your brand, right? And Panini has spent a decade building Prizm into this hobby juggernaut that it is today. But hype, while it provides a very short-term reward with driving up sales initially and driving up demand, when hype is consistently incongruent with expectations and then incongruent with reality as a result, it creates a very dangerous precedent. And what it leads to is a lot of distrust in your brand, right? It leads to resentment. I've seen a lot more anger towards Panini, towards, the whole Dutch auction system and them raising SRP on their box prices when still putting out the same value, so to speak, as if it was 2018 or 2019 prices with their products that they're putting out. And ultimately, it will keep alienating people from wanting to come back. Maybe they'll buy the singles, but at that point, that's money that's going into the pockets of the people opening this. And if they're not getting the returns to justify opening it, what you're left with is the whales kind of supporting what you have. And if those whales happen to lose interest, every single one you lose is a major hit, which ultimately spells doom for your company. Really Panini, I think, here is kind of focused, and this isn't just exclusive to Panini. I know I'm picking on them a lot, but these prices on these products and what the hype is being done to them, whether it be through the manufacturers themselves or through the distributors or through the vendors that are actually selling these boxes, whoever it may be. In some cases, the consumer is to blame too, right? You know, there are people who are actively paying for this. And by giving your money to these companies and paying these prices, you are encouraging these practices to have these boxes at these prices. You know, every time you place an order for one of these through, you know, David Adams or Blowout, again, not to pick on them, that is saying that, hey, I agree with this price. I'm willing to pay this for this product. And when they see that, you know, why are they going to stop doing that? I don't blame them at all. That's part of the capitalist market. The problem with that is that when you have that focus on that, it really caters to that upper echelon tier of consumers and not so much that middle ground that will ultimately kind of, you know, be your family type that will pass it down to generations. It's more so these whales where you're very heavily relying on a few consumers rather than expanding your customer base, which to me is a very dangerous business model. It can lead to, you know, once those loyalists, even if they leave, then you really start to be screwed. You know, perhaps they'll keep you going for a long time, but people can only be burned so many times. And especially if there are alternatives out there, especially with fanatics, if they really put in what they say they're going to do to your baseball, football, basketball brands, and Panini is left holding the bag on just these combat sports, it's going to be very detrimental in the long run. And unfortunately, too, and it might be detrimental too, is the people who are paying these prices, and it may alienate them from the hobby as well. So in the short term, I don't blame these companies for trying to take advantage of the hobby hot streak that has been going on for the past several years now. Even to this day, despite how much things have cooled, it's still going on. I think the data here shows that. But I think this is an hour-long, very telling tale of how a brand can establish itself. And then when you mix hype into that brand, what it can do is ultimately lead to a devaluation of the brand in losing its luster, its prestige, its reputation. This could be applied to anything, but specifically within a hobby context here. So this was a mouthful. This might be the longest episode I've done, but there was a lot of backstory that had to go into this. As you can tell, it was almost 20 minutes of backstory. I hope that you found this data interesting, even if you have zero interest in wrestling cards and you stayed with me until the end. I think that this episode was never meant to be really a focus on the wrestling cards themselves and looking at individual wrestlers and how their cards act. It was more so a general reflection of the market, but using something like this that, in my opinion, has had a very inorganic interest for the most part. Are there people who actually, you know, collect these cards and were genuine collectors? Yes, of course. It's not an all or nothing proposition, as we say many times on this show. But so much of it has been caught up into this hype. And I think that this is a pattern that we're going to see repeated time and time again. We've already seen it repeated several times. And it could be foretelling or foreshadowing events with some of the other products or sports that we see out there in the hobby. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments section down below. I'll be back next week with another episode of the show. But until then, take care, stay safe, be kind, and thank you as always for listening.